In the last election cycle in the United States, women won 20% of the Senate seats. And all the headlines kept screaming out, "Women take over the Senate, women take over the Senate." I felt like screaming back, "Wait a minute, everyone. 50% of the population getting 20% of the seats? That's not a takeover. That's an embarrassment."
Some say there isn't really a gender pay gap. Well, that is just wrong. The typical woman working full-time in 2014 was paid 79% of what men were paid. But when you break it down, for African American women, that number is 60%. For Latinas, it's 55%. And the last time I checked, there's no discount for being a woman. Groceries don't cost us less, rent doesn't cost us less, so why should we be paid less?
I think these are very underrated because they can do more, but people expect them to do less.
Firstly, I don't think there's enough women in management positions that can influence closing that gap. And secondly, I think women lose financial ground when they leave the workforce to raise a family. And I don't think there's enough women who are pursuing the higher salaried fields that can help compensate for that gap. And lastly, I don't know that women understand their worth and can ask for a higher salary as they're negotiating through promotions or performance reviews.
But, especially with World War II, that's really when a lot of the women went to the factories to start working.
Right.
And it starts from that concept on how the women were helping the economy and helping the war effort. And they weren't really considered the sole or prime breadwinners. It was always seen as something that they were doing to supplement the family income. I think that's kind of historically the way it started.
Okay.
And then there was definitely the definition of a man's job versus a woman's job, which really in today's society makes no sense for us to still have that distinction.
Right, exactly.
So I think there's a lot of historical reasons as to why we have the current wage gap.
I think that is super important. I think we talk a lot about once you get into the workforce, but I think we really have to back up and say, how do we get people to go into fields that are, going to pay them well? How do we encourage them to do that so they can have these kind of important careers and then ultimately have the earning power? And with that earning power comes a lot of flexibility, comes a lot of ability to make lots of, kind of more broad choices in terms of how you spend your time.
In terms of the gender wage gap, these are the reasons why we have it, and also men need to realize, they're just as important into the conversation. Although Ladies Get Paid is a female-focused company, we understand that we do need male allies, to help us in terms of how do we strategically make sure that we achieve equal pay and have these conversations in these companies and understand why is it important and why is it fair that women are paid equally for the equal work.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. I think a couple things. One is I do think people make generalized statements. So for instance, if I'm in a meeting and we're talking about should we promote someone or should someone get an assignment, you might get people to say things like, that person can really deliver, that person is a real driver. And it definitely does happen where sometimes, particularly with women, it's, oh, that person, man, they're too aggressive, they drive too hard, their boss.
And this is where language and words are very powerful. And we have to make sure we're being very deliberate in our word choices.
To kind of say, well, why do you say that? Either identify a behavior that maybe needs some coaching for the person, they could do this better, or really kind of put the person who's making the claim on the spot to really self-reflect and say, is that real? Can I actually prove it? And it's amazing when you call people on stuff, a lot of times they'll realize, oh, I can't just say that and get away with it, and I can't prove it. And so in my experience, a lot of times it'll just kind of, well, I guess it's not a blocking issue. Like maybe we should, promote this person or give them that big project, or maybe they're really performing okay. But you have to call people on it, and it's not a one-time thing. Like I'm still doing it. I've been in this field for 30 years, and I think you just kind of have to continue to raise the bar on some of these kind of stereotypes that get verbalized. I think there's a lot of things. I think one is that we really need to do a better job of making sure that both men and women have equal access to the work. And in order to do that, they really need equal access to the educational fields.
So it really is making sure you're aware how much people in your field are being interested.
Right. Whereas, for whatever reason, boys tend to have had some coding skills pretty early, usually before middle school. And so the fact that boys have been exposed to it and experienced it and girls haven't has an impact on whether they're interested in it. And so really we have to kind of bring the exposure to a very young age, like in the 10-year-old range, to give people access to the experience to see whether or not it's something that they really like to do.
Just passed equal pay in the state of Washington. And in the state of Washington, it is completely illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender. And there are laws now in place that there are basically penalties that employers have to pay if there's gender discrimination.
African American women have to prove that they're not angry. Latinas risk being branded fiery hotheads. A group of Asian American women and men at Facebook wore pins one day that said, "I may or may not be good at math."
And so if you are able to have a seat at that table, you're going to be changing cultures.
It's important to make the point that the failure to ensure equal pay for women also impacts families and the broader economy.
Gender inequality harms men along with women. Racism hurts whites along with minorities. And the lack of equal opportunity keeps all of us from fulfilling our true potential.
We need equal pay for equal work.